Hey YouTubians, it's Tony here from We Try Anything. The channel likes trying anything, so you don't have to. In today's video, we're going to be looking at an analog digital watch from the Casio collection, with this one being the Casio AQ-160, which has a module number of 3319. As usual with any watch reviews that we undertake on the We Try Anything channel, we'll be looking around the Casio AQ-160, highlighting some of the materials used, the design of the watch, and mentioning some of the sizes along the way. We will then go through some of the functions that this watch has to offer, pop it on our wrist and say what it's like to wear. There will be links to the instructions of this watch in the description box below, and an Amazon affiliate link if you wish to find out more about this watch or any watches within the Casio range. So as is the case with most of the watches that we feature on the We Try Anything channel, this watch was an eBay purchase, and unfortunately it was one of them eBay purchases where you pay your money and then you find out that something has gone wrong prior to the seller posting it. Now in this instance it was the strap on this watch, and it did add to the overall cost that this watch I managed to get it for. Now what I will say with this strap, this is a genuine authentic Casio strap that I put on here because I don't like to put just random straps on them anymore, and it was one of the hardest straps I've ever put on a watch. I've got to say it's really hard. I mean obviously this is, without spinning the watch too much, this is an integrated strap, and geez was this hard. I had to use a jeweler's screwdriver just to make the hole just a slight touch bigger, something I wouldn't suggest that you do, but it did manage to work. But it took me hours and days just to get it right because it just kept clipping out. So if you are looking at a watch of this nature and the strap has broke, then just be aware that you can get the straps still for these watches, and they are authentic Casio straps, but very hard to change. So just be aware of that fact if you are looking at one of these watches. The other thing to mention is that this watch is available in a few other different variants. With the one that I have being the negative display version, you can get a positive display, which I'm showing you here, but as you can see the positive display, I think that the hands do tend to disappear as the display, or the LCD positive display, does tend to dominate really, whereas this watch that I'm featuring in this video does allow the hands to contrast against the background, which is what attracted me to this watch. And you can also get a metal version of this watch, which is like a metal bracelet version, where the case is obviously metal, as is the case with this watch, and also the bracelet is as well, which looks quite, I've got to say, looks quite up there really in terms of looks. With all that out the way, what we're going to do, we're going to take a closer look at the Casio AQ-160 analog digital watch that we have featured here. Now first of all, let's look at the size of this watch so you can see if this watch is for you and your wrist. The case from the left hand side to what would be the right hand side, you are looking at 43 millimeters, and even if you add the 4 plastic pushes that you've got adorning the watch either side, it still is 43 millimeters, because these watches, these pushes are a little bit more recessed into the watch than you would get on some of the other Casios that I have featured on this channel. Look to look, or top of the case to the bottom of the case, you are looking at 47 millimeters, which for someone like me with a 6.5 inch wrist means that this watch should sit quite well and not feel too cumbersome, and that is something I will talk about when I do pop the watch on my wrist. Now in terms of how deep the watch case is, it is a chunky-ish 16 millimeters from the case back to the resin crystal at the top, but as the watch isn't angular, this profile is quite smooth. It just doesn't inhibit any form of wearing a long sleeve shirt or a long sleeve jumper or anything like, or a hoodie. It just simply glides over it, which is a nice touch to this watch. In a lug width, where the strap is connected to the watch's case, and I'm going to spin the watch around for this instance, you are looking at about 16 millimeters. But with this watch being, or with this strap being a replacement genuine Casio one, it is more integrated within the watch's design. So just bear that in mind. So if you were to get a different strap, it would have to be around that size, or would have to have an element of flair, because otherwise it would just look really strange. Now I say that because in the instance of this watch here, the Casio W86, I have used a non-standard Casio strap on this, and you can see it just makes that case look a bit strange compared to the rest of the strap. So if you are looking at a strap, then I would probably look at a genuine replacement Casio one, which you can still get for these watches, as it does add to the overall aesthetic of the watch. Now as we are talking about the straps, then I might as well mention the materials used to create this watch. Now the straps here are what would be a plastic resin affair, black plastic resin affair as it were, and as you can see as I'm moving the strap retainer, that is matte resin as well, as is the pin and buckle. As you can see, it keeps in line with the overall aesthetic of the watch, with it being it doesn't have any branding on there, but it is a matte black plastic. If I was just to quickly zoom into the texturing, as you can see here, it does feature a nice element of texturing on the outer part of the strap, and you do get what would be a domed feeling to, or a domed design feature to that there, which is nice on these straps, because as some of the watch straps I have featured on the channel, they tend to be a bit, well, just not boring, but just a bit flat. But that is on the back really, where the straps are quite smooth and there's no ribbing or anything like that, or if there is, it is minimal, but you don't feel it on your wrist, which is a nice feature to have really, because it just might add to this watch's comfortable factor. Now, they are a little on the thin side compared to other Casios that I have featured on the channel, but it doesn't degrade the overall feel of the watch. The case in this instance is made up of polished stainless steel, which I think is a nice departure from the usual painted chrome effect paint on plastic that you do get with a lot of Casios. The thin black plastic bezel, as you can see here, is small, but I feel allows the watch face to be nicely separated from the polished outer case, and the black plastic is also found at the bottom of the case where the stainless steel case back affixes to the watch. Now, the other thing to mention is that obviously, as you can see here, the bezel will pick up scratches, as does the polished outer case, so just bear that in mind. Now, as we've been just mentioned about the what would be the case back, as you can see here, it is a stainless steel case back, and it does have 4 what would be Phillips style screws that will allow the case back to affix to the watch, which makes it easy for you to gain access to both the battery and the module. But also, what I like about the case back is that it does mention more than the usual that you would get on most Casio watches, where you get what the pushers do. So not only do you get what the pushers do on the main buttons, but also just in some of the what would be some of the other modes. Say for example on the stopwatch, it also says that this button will allow you to reset and split times, etc. And as you can see, you've got the mode, you've got what will be start and stop and search, and also you got light, but also it indicates an auto light function that this watch has built in, and it is activated by just a long press of this button. So it's a nice little addition to this watch, just to give you some idea what each of the pushers do. And also it features what would be the extra elements that this watch has built into its module. It also features what this watch has, which is a water resistance up to what would be 100 meters or 10 bar in this instance. And also this watch has a Japanese quartz movement built into it. But let's spin around to the front of the watch, and you've got to have to agree with me, it is a stunning watch, and it is a watch of contrast really. So you've got the what would be the black strap contrasting against the polished case, which contrasts against the bezel, and then you've got the hands that contrast against the negative LCD display which is built into this watch. The other thing to mention about this watch as well in terms of design is that there's no decals built into this watch. I mean, the only decals I can see there is the Illumination and obviously the water resistance, which is mentioned on the front, and other than the what would be the emission of hour markers, and they put in what would be minute markers to the inner chapter ring of this watch, there's not a lot going on with that, which I find really nice. I mean, it does still add to that little bit of a sporty appeal that this watch may have, but again, it's not one of these watches that shout out what the watch is capable of doing, like for example water resistance or illuminator that you do get on some of the other Casios I have featured on this channel. So it is really nice. As I'm talking about what would be the LCD display, etc., I do, as I've mentioned, I do love the way the contrast of what would be the hands and the digital LCD display. Now with the hands, obviously you've got that nice, it's got like a nice satin metal effect to it with lume. Now what I'll just quickly do is move the watch over to the left and just show you how the lume looks in darkness and semi-darkness. And again, what I'll show you again later on with how the backlighting works on this watch, the camera does pick up a lot more than what it will look like in real life, but again you can get an idea of the time in darkness and semi-darkness. Now let's move on to what would be the LCD digital display, and I've got to say, it is really nice. Now I'm just going to move the watch away from the camera just to show you how easy to read this watch has. Now at the top you do have like what would be a dot matrix style typeface where you can change it between, say, Thursday or what would be the date. Now obviously that will change depending on what mode you'll go in and etc., which I shall show you later on in the video. But also what I like about this watch, you've got quite a nice thick chunky-ish typeface to it as well, which is really nice, and it just makes that watch really easy to read. Now what I will say with this watch, I do find that if you do look at the watch straight on, the LCD display for me dominates over the hands. Now while obviously these hands are quite bright on camera, in real life I do find that I read the time quicker off the LCD display than I do the hands. But when the watch or the LCD display is at an angle, you will see it does tend to disappear and them hands do come into play. So they do complement each other really well in terms of how to read the time on a watch in different situations. Also I like the dynamism of what would be like a graphic indicator towards the bottom of the watch, which does change depending on what mode you're in, etc. So for example, you can see here counting up the seconds here, and also it will change if you're in the stopwatch, countdown timer, etc., giving you indications of elapsed time or countdown time, etc. So it's a nice little addition to this watch. Now while I'm talking about the digital display of this watch, I might as well show you the backlighting. Now if I move the watch over to the left, now as you can see, obviously I'm featuring a little video to the right hand, or a little clip to the right hand corner, and as you can see on the left, you can't really see on the lighting that I've got going on there, but on the right you can see in what would be darkness and semi-darkness. Now the only thing I will say, like I've said about the Lume, is that the camera does tend to pick it up more than what you will see in real life. I mean, you will be able to read the time off the watch in darkness and semi-darkness, but in the reality of looking at the watch, it's not super bright as you can see on the right. It is at a brightness where you can just make out the time. So I just thought I'd mention it because some people may think that the backlighting on this watch is really strong. It isn't, but it's just okay really. It's ideal for just quickly reading the time in darkness and semi-darkness. Now the other thing to mention about the backlighting on this is it's got a default of 1.5 seconds in terms of how long the illumination lasts for, but also you can change it to 3 seconds as well. Now that's ideal because you don't have to keep pressing your finger on the button. You can just press it, release, and you'll just get that illumination delay, which is great. But also this watch features what would be auto lighting. So if I keep that top right hand button pressed down, and as you can see, there's a little graphic symbol that's highlighted there, and if I keep moving the watch like this, which I'm showing you again on the clip to this, it will activate the backlighting on this watch. So it's a great little feature where you can just flick your wrists and get an idea of the time. But what I will say is that it may deplete your battery, because obviously move your wrist quite a lot without you knowing, and obviously that will activate the light. So just bear that in mind. Now while we're talking about the features of this watch, I might as well go on about saying that it does have daylight saving time built into it. And it also has 12 and 24-hour formats, 24-hour being known in the USA of military time, and it does have that built into the watch, which again is easily activated via the adjustment function, which is a long press to the top left hand button on this watch. Now the one thing I will mention is that I will be doing a tutorial video of this watch coming soon, so if you can wait for that, then I'll show you how to operate a lot of the functions on this watch. But if you can't, then I have linked to the instructions of this watch, which will take you off to the Casio website. Now, as well as the above features and functions mentioned in this video on the AQ-160, this watch also has the following built into its 3319 module. Now the first one being world time. So if I just press the mode button, as you can see, world time is easily accessible, where you can just scroll through the many cities that this watch has built into it, where you can respect the different time zones around the world. Now this will allow you to view the time in up to 21 cities, and also takes into account up to 29 time zones. Now that's ideal if you are dealing with people or communicating with loved ones in Anchorage or Los Angeles and stuff like that. You do get an idea of what time it is in that part of the world, so it's ideal for that. It's also ideal if you are looking to travel to that part of the world. Now the other feature as well is that you could have that set on world time, and then have what would be the hands set on what would be your local time. So the hands do come into play really well in this aspect if you are looking to travel around the world or to communicate with loved ones. The next thing this watch has, it has a built-in countdown timer alarm where the measuring unit is 1 second. It will count down from 60 minutes and you can have a time setting range between 1 minute and 60 minutes. And it also has an auto repeat function, so if you turn it on and the elapsed time or the countdown reaches 0, it will start the countdown again from whatever time that you've set on this watch. And also this watch also notifies you when the timer is close to reaching 0, and I think it will allow you to, it will obviously beep when it reaches 0, but I think it will beep 30 seconds before the timer reaches 0, or 10 seconds or something like that. But it is more listed in instructions, and I will talk about it in the tutorial video coming soon. So I'll just quickly do that. And the next thing, it does have a stopwatch, which the stopwatch has a measuring unit of 100th of a second, which is indicated at the bottom. You've also got what would be the measuring capacity, which is up to 60 seconds, which you can see at the top, and it will measure an elapsed time, split time, and also 2 finish times. Now also, as you probably noticed, the graphic display does give you an indication of the stopwatch working, etc. And if I just press the split time there, it does pause the graphic display, but you will see that little apostrophe there just to indicate that the stopwatch is still working. And if I release the split, as you can see, the time's jumped up. But it's a nice little stopwatch, and it's just easy to operate and easy to use, really. So it's a great addition to this watch. Now, as well as a stopwatch, this watch also features what would be 5 independent alarms, with one of them including a snooze function built into it. Now the alarm will sound for about 20 seconds once activated, or once you've set it. And as you can see here, you also have an hourly signal that you can turn on and turn off built into this watch. And finally, this watch also allows you to adjust the what would be the analog hands via what is hand setting mode. Now with all that out of the way, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop this watch on my wrist and see what it's like to wear. So here's the Casio AQ-160 on my wrist. And my wrist is, just to remind you of my wrist size, you are looking at about 6.5 inches. And I'm going to say it does wear really well. It is comfortable. I do know I'm wearing the watch, but only just for a short amount of time, and then I get used to it quite quickly. And the watch doesn't weigh much really. You're looking at about 41 grams, so it's not a watch that you know is on your wrist for any amount of time, if you know what I mean. So you know when you're moving your hand, you don't feel the watch too much in terms of weight. So you do tend to I wouldn't say forget that you're wearing it, but it's not something that you know that you're wearing. Now, wrist movement, no, only a little bit, and that's just here really. But other than that, it doesn't inhibit any form of movement on my hand or anything like that, which is a nice thing to say. And also, I think on the wrist, this watch, I mean, obviously my light setup isn't doing it much justice, but it does look really good. And I'm going to say it's also easy to read the time from afar. Now, you do have the added advantage of having analog hands, so if you do turn the watch to a certain degree and that digital display starts to disappear, you can still tell the time at an angle, which is great. And other than that, I've got to say, I think the styling in this watch, while it being simple, is a style of contrast where you've got the hands contrasting against the background, the digital display, which contrasts against the polished metal case, which contrasts against what would be the blue resin strap. And I think for that aspect, it does make it a very standout but mature watch, especially as Casio has shown some restraint with not having decals top and bottom about what the watch is capable of. And also it just has it just there, which just, it does stand out a little, but again, I don't think it's much of a problem really. But overall, I would say that it is simply a great looking watch, worthy of a lot of people's wrists, and it's packed full of useful features like the stopwatch, countdown timer, world time, 5 independent alarms, etc. And with that water resistance of 100 meters, I think this watch can be worn in a lot of situations that a lot of other watches out there can't. If you are looking for a watch to add to your wrist or your collection that has a lot of contrast to it, then I would go for the Casio AQ-160, as it gets a massive thumbs up from me. So I hope you like the review of the Casio AQ-160, and if you did, then click on the thumbs up button, always helps the channel. If you want to see more watches from the We Try Anything channel, then click on the subscription button below. And thank you for watching this video, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.